That's what it is. All right. Well, hello, 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 and welcome to Intercultural Spark. And Intercultural Spark, it's about that spark inside each of us that drives us to spark change in the world. And today, what are your roots? We're talking about Thanksgiving. There's so much right now about tradition and roots and what brings us to this moment in time. So I'm really excited to have Lynn Hazan here today. She is a professional recruiter, but also she's Jewish and Syrian and Egyptian and Canadian, and just has a world of different backgrounds that bring her to this moment. And we have Lynn. We also have Derek Lumpkins, who's a community organizer in Boston, who born in Roxbury, lived in Japan for 5 years, back to London, now back in Roxbury. So we're going to share their stories and experience, as well as, of course, it's Thanksgiving, and it's really a great time to talk about gratitude and so much to be thankful for now. So welcome to Intercultural Spark. Hi, Lynn, how are you?
I'm so happy to be here with you today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to move myself over to the right. I feel like that's the position of honor there on the left. So, in the US, we like to hyphenate everyone's identity. And I was thinking about it. You as a hyphenation would be like Jewish, Canadian, French, Egyptian, Syrian, and American. I'm wondering how you see it. How do you identify and how do you, I guess, blend all the different influences that you have on yourself?
Well, first, I am a Canadian citizen. I was
Okay.
born in a Jewish family. My mother was born in Cairo. My father was born in Syria, in Damascus. He went on to Egypt to find work, just like the Joseph story. They got together. They got married in 1948, and they tried to get into the United States, but they weren't allowed in. Canada had open door policy. We'd love immigrants. Come on in. They moved to Montreal. Didn't ever experience winter in their lives and started a new life. And I was born in Montreal, had an amazing background growing up speaking French. And then for graduate school, I moved to the United States, and I've been here ever since. So I've had...
great. Yeah. Sorry, because a quick question I want to find out, when you say that your parents applied for citizen or applied to come to the US but couldn't get in, because we talk about, not that we get too political, but there's so many immigration stories now. What was the reason that they were denied back when they tried to come in the 40s?
Yeah, very good question. Actually, they went by country of origin in terms of letting immigrants come in, not so different from today. And both my parents were French citizens, but they went by land of origin, country of origin. So my mother could have gotten in because she was from Egypt, but Syria was no good. So they decided, well, we'll go to Canada instead. My mother had a brother living there, and it was French speaking. So that was a real plus for them. So at least there would be something of familiarity for them moving to Canada.
Oh, okay. So you still speak French now. I saw the invitation. Was that to your parents' wedding that was in French?
Right. And what is amazing is that recently, before my mother died, we were helping to go through some of her materials, and I actually found this little booklet and this package, and my mother had stored her wedding invitations in French from her side, her husband's side, my father, her school records from La Mission Laïque Française, and all these notes that I had never, ever seen in my life. And she brought them secretly from Egypt to Paris. That's where they went before Montreal, to Montreal, and then all the different homes that we had. And she had it with her. So this is one of my most cherished memories, because it's like my mother growing up. And that invitation that you just saw was evidence of her sacred tradition of getting married and having the invitation as a souvenir.
And when you look at traditions, how are you influenced now in terms of some of the dishes that you make? I was looking at this.
Yeah. You passed one right now. Actually, this one right in front of us. This is Sephardic charoset. This is what we use in our Passover ritual at the Passover Seder. And this is made with ingredients from the Middle East. So we have dates and raisins and nuts and apricots. And this time I made it into a visual. The Jews were crossing the Red Sea, and the apricots represent the parting of the Red Sea when they went from slavery to freedom. This is a very significant theme for my family, from leaving Egypt, literally the Passover story, and going into the promised land. So our foods, our rituals are accentuated, especially for me during Passover, because most of the people sitting at the table literally came from Egypt and left the promised land and went to new countries. So for me, my story is very much similar to my parents, is that I left from Canada to move to a new country to start my own journey and traditions. And here you'll see homemade grape leaves.
No, I was just say that's so interesting though for people. So when we celebrate Passover, for those who might not know, it celebrates when the Jews were freed from being slaves in Egypt. So that is interesting when you're talking about that's literal. What
Literally.
do you see, yeah. What do you see as some of the differences though culturally, let's say between Egypt and Syria? Where did your parents actually meet? And then how did that blend of cultures make a difference in your own growing up?
Well, the difference between Egyptian Jews and Syrian Jews is not really that significant, because we're all under the umbrella of being Sephardic Jews, originally from Spain. Actually, this is rosquette. These are very famous biscuits that my mother made, very crunchy, and I can't make them for the life of me. Oh, geez. I try to roll that dough, and it looks like Play-Doh when I do it. So many of the cultural traditions are the same. We all spoke French at home. Actually, Arabic was the second language. And I have to tell you, when I was little growing up in Montreal, Arabic was the secret language. My parents wanted us to speak French. So Arabic was the language they spoke between themselves. And geez, I wish I could have learned more of it. So all I know are expressions here and there. And what's wonderful about learning languages, and I'm a big supporter of diversity in that respect, is that when you're talking to people, no matter where they're from, I listen and I hear, where are you from? And when I would go to the farmer's market with my mother, she would know that the vendor was Italian, and she'd start talking to him in Italian, one of the many languages she knew, and the vendor would talk back to her in Italian and then drop the price. So it was
interesting.
So fun, and that connection with people in their language of choice, because I grew up in Montreal and there were many languages that you get fine-tuned literally to the language, and as a sign of respect to that person, you switch to the language they speak in as a way to gain trust and to develop a relationship.
And I'm sorry, I keep cutting you off, and I feel like it's because, when we got my husband is Brazilian. I think you might know that. And we got him a book, which is Jewish as a Second Language, when we first got married. And there's one phrase in there that says, like, that the idea that you've had 25 years now to finish your sentences. And they were talking about, when Jews converse, that if you're not interrupted, then what you're saying is not interesting. So I keep cutting you off, but I feel like it's because that's just what we do. It's a cultural thing. So sorry about that. But I wanted to ask you how many languages you speak. I also do want to say that for people that are watching live, we don't know you're here unless you say hello. So please say hello in the comments. And also, if you have questions, you can ask those questions in the comments. So please do that. But how many languages do you speak?
Well, I grew up speaking French. We went to schools that were primarily English, although we did have French classes. I took Spanish in high school. It was very easy because once you have a Romance language in your background, any other Romance language is very easy to speak. And we had Hebrew from going to Hebrew school. And so all of them can always get better with practice. And I just love learning languages because I have an ear for that. And I got that from my mother because she also knew Italian and Greek, and she could pick up languages very naturally. So it was fun for us.
And I do want to share this picture. Tell me, what is this picture?
So if you look on the first row, the extreme left, the little girl on the very end is my mother. And she was called Elie Pardo, and they used to call, this is at La Mission Française Laïque Française. It was a school in Cairo that my mother spent all her years growing up, and she was a very avid student. She read every book in the library. Her teachers loved her. And I love seeing pictures of my mother as a little girl so I can have a sense of what she was like. And she kept every single report card from when she was at La Mission Laïque Française. And I found them. This is like treasure for me to have these souvenirs of my mother.
Mm-hmm. So how old was she when she went to France then? Because she was born in Syria, but then where did your parents meet? I think you said that, but it looks like she went to France when she was much younger than I thought.
No, actually, they were French citizens living in Egypt. So my mother was born in Cairo. That's where she lived her whole life before moving to Canada with my father. And my father was born in Damascus. And actually, they had a synagogue in their house and even had Torah scrolls. So when he was growing up, he decided it was better economically to go to Egypt to find work. And that's where he met my mother on the beach, of course. And
that's great.
After a week, and they got married in 1948. And it was a precarious time because of the Arab-Israeli conflict and the state of Israel being and they saw the writing on the wall and said, it's probably a good time to leave. And all their friends and relatives said, well, why? Life is so good in Egypt. And they just said, we have a feeling, and that it wasn't going to be safe for them as Jews to stay. So they were one of the first people to leave. And gradually over time, they brought the rest of the family over so we could be reunited. And that was the commitment of family. That we could all help each other. And actually, I even have a very wild story that in Syria, my grandfather married twice.
Really?
He had girls.
Oh, I'm laughing because wait, so these were sequential or simultaneous?
Well, it depends on how you look at it. He had girls from his first wife, and according to Jewish tradition, biblically, if you only have girls, if you want to have another wife and have boys in the family, you can marry twice. So under the same house, he had two wives living in Syria, and thankfully she gave birth to some boys as well. So I didn't know about this until much later in my life. So to think that my grandfather had two wives, and how must they have felt living under the same roof together? So it must have been some pretty wild times.
It's connected technically, depending on your interpretation of the Bible. It's so funny. My husband's not Jewish, but when he hears these clauses and stuff like that, we have one son. So when he watches this, I'll be like, it doesn't apply because we already have a son. So wow. One other thing real quick, and then I want to bring Derek on and say hello. But Morris, who I believe is related to you, says, how wonderful for your leadership as women today. And what I do want to say, because we're talking about your personal story and how you get here. But so Lynn, you're like an award-winning recruiter in Chicago, and people should sign up for if anyone's interested in jobs in marketing and communications, clearly they should sign up for your email or to follow you because of all that. But also what I love is when you do things, you're like all in. You were the Chicago Jewish News. You were the Citizen of the Year. You were like Alumni of the Year from DePaul. Like when you do something, you're like all in. I think any membership organization you've been in, you were Member of the Year. That sounds like just something that's really part of your personality. How do you feel that drive even connects to maybe the story of your family?
The success stories are all because of personal motivation, that I see people as a real big connecting force in my life. And by being involved with people, whether it's a professional association or being involved in school projects, having a student alumni as interns at my firm, being part of my family, it's all about people. So it all connects well together. And it's amazing how when you make connections, they stick. And so I'm a relationship recruiter. We like to work with both clients and candidates on a long-term basis. So it's fun for me. And anywhere I go, even when I'm on the L and I hear people from Ethiopia and they're on the L and I look at them and I can recognize them and I say, hello, I've been to Ethiopia, and they look at me like, what? And I said, I was on a humanitarian humanitarian mission, and then I come back and do work because I see there's a need. So that's who I am. I love to be able to contribute, and there's good for everybody as a result of that. So it keeps my engine going.
That's wonderful. Well, so I'm going to have you, you'll stay around. I'm going to have Derek come in. And then at the end, we'll talk about how all these roads and journeys that we take maybe influence the traditions, maybe for Thanksgiving this year, but also just all that we have to be grateful for with our journeys. So I will see you in a minute. And here comes Derek. Hi, Derek. How are you?
Deanna. Good. How are you? Good to see you again.
Good. Thank you. You too.
And
So it's interesting.
From Boston. I'm representing Roxbury today, as you see in my T-shirt.
I love that. And I love the idea of how, I was just saying, Lynn, like when she's into something, she is all in, and very much the same with you as far as, well, because I was looking at just the way that you align your personal and your professional to make change in the world. And that's such an important thing that we talk about with Intercultural Spark. Because I feel like if you align everything about you, like you can be just so powerful. And in particular, you said you were born in the Roxbury neighborhood of Boston, and then actually went on to lead it and showcase it as such a vibrant community. So
I did. So that. For about 7 years or so, I was the executive director of a nonprofit called Discover Roxbury. And it was founded by a woman who lived in the city for a little bit of time, but then moved to the suburbs. And she noticed that in her suburban community, the way people were talking about Roxbury and neighborhoods like Roxbury, which is very negative, very pejorative. And so she started this organization to promote the colonial history of Roxbury, similar to the way colonial history is promoted in downtown Boston. So by the time that I came on, it was up and running, but it was very colonial focused and didn't really have a strong connection to the contemporary residents and the contemporary history and culture of the neighborhood. So I started off as the programming and marketing manager to sort of change the programming, to add new things, to add new approaches to the history of the neighborhood. And then I became the executive director after 2 years. And then I really started to expand it to include more food, more music, more arts and culture. We did tours that weren't just on foot, they were also by bike. So just really trying to modernize it and make it much more accessible to people in the neighborhood, both in terms of how they showed up in the stories, their contribution to the stories, but also how people who are not from the neighborhood or people who may have lived there at one point and then moved away could come back and relate to it again.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know, and I feel like I might as well just position myself as the jerk in this conversation, because I had mentioned to you, I lived in Boston. I was there from 87 to 94 and was involved in Newbury Street, so the Newbury Street League. And just living in Boston, but being an outsider, you hear things about different neighborhoods. And so I guess when I say I'm a jerk, it's just more just attesting to what we heard, what people outside of Roxbury heard about Roxbury. And so it's really exciting to see what you did. In fact, we used to do Art Newbury Street, and I saw what you did with Art Rocks in Roxbury. It would have been fun. Actually, Michelle Messina, I think, is the executive director at Newbury Street League now. They should do a partnership on those days to kind of maybe do shuttle buses back and forth. I don't know.
Well, unfortunately, Discover Roxbury sort of no longer exists. I mean, the artists are still working as a collaborative, so there is still that artistic representation happening. Still a lot of art's going on. So, I would love to find a way to sort of connect that organization with the one on Newbury Street, just to see if there can be some new networks connected and networks made. But during my time, we did do an art show on Newbury Street. I think
fantastic.
American Islamic Society. It was something along those lines, where they were looking for new content and we were looking for new venues and new opportunities and new audiences. And at that particular time, 5 of us had traveled to Egypt, and it was before Arab Spring. So, there were, so I was a photographer at the time. There was another photographer. There was a mixed media artist. There was a sculptor. So we all sort of combined our efforts and we combined our artwork and worked with that organization to have, I think it was a month-long art show there on Newbury Street. And then they brought in the food, they brought in music. We made it a very interactive, collaborative, immersive experience based around this time that we had all spent in Egypt. So it was great. It was fantastic. But just going back a little bit, one of the things I really found interesting about Lynn's story was how her family was so eager to come to the States. And I was thinking about my youth and how I couldn't wait to leave the States. Because as I've told you, and I've showed you in photos, I have a very large extended family that's been in the neighborhood probably since the 19 teens or the 1920s. So in this photo here on the far left, the little boy is my eldest uncle. And then he's sitting on my grandmother's lap.
Wow.
So next to her is her mother and father. And then next to her is her mother and father, I think. I'm pretty sure that's my great-great-grandmother. I'm not really sure if that's my great-great-grandfather, but
wow.
in the picture, there's got to be some connection here. And I'm guessing that my grandfather is taking the photo. So this photo is from the 1940s, and it's sort of in the upper reaches of Roxbury, close to Franklin Park. This is sort of how I would sort of say my story begins, because some of these folks are from other states. I know my great-grandmother is from Connecticut, but my grandmother was born here in Boston. So, the family sort of started with her here in Boston. And then if you have the other photo of my cousins, that's from the 1980s, when we're all sort of just playing and hanging out. So I just have this very, very, very large extended family. And so it felt kind of confining sometimes, just having all these people around. And there were times where, there we are, and I'm sure you can spot me.
Little pumpkins.
So it's cousins and second cousins from all over the place. And it was a fun time. I had a fun childhood. But then as I got older and became a teen, going around town, people would say, oh, I know your cousin. I know your uncle. I know your grandfather. I know your grandmother. And I was like, oh, I just can't escape. I just couldn't escape. And that's partly why I decided to go to college in Pennsylvania, just to have some distance. And then having that first taste of distance, I was like, I don't really want to go back. And so I found the opportunity to go to Japan. And I was really just planning to go for 1 year. But I ended up going with a great cohort of people. So we all became friends. There were about 15 of us. And then we all kind of decided to renew together. So, 1 year became 2. And then after 2, I was like, well, I'm still not ready to go back. And I'd like to improve my language skills. Because similar to Lynn, I think I also have an aptitude for languages. So,
now, what languages do you speak?
Well, English natively, Japanese, I'm pretty conversant in Japanese. I studied French in high school, so I can still read it. And there I am as an English teacher in Japan. So I was teaching middle school. And then I am trying to teach myself Spanish because I really love being in Spain. I love Spanish culture and the food and just everything about it. And also traveling through Latin America. So, I'm really trying to improve my language skills. I don't like studying out of books. I don't like studying off the apps. I like being in the place. And I attribute that partly to having been in Japan and, just being sort of dropped into the country. And the way I kind of explained it to people was that I felt like I was reborn, like I had a second birth.
When you got to Japan.
When I got to Japan, because I didn't know anybody, I didn't know the culture, I didn't know the language, I didn't know anything about the country other than what we get here in the States.
Did you have a plan when you went, or you were just like, I'm just going to go, I got to get out? Did you have an anchor to greet you, or you just said, I'm going?
I did have an anchor. So I applied to the Japan Exchange and Teaching Program. So it's a national teachers program for everything from language to sports to culture to other things. So I was on the language track as an English teacher. So for the first 2 years, I was with the JET program. I was in Hiroshima. And then after that, I went off to the mountains because that's the only job I could find as sort of a freelance independent teacher. So I was off in the mountains of Kyoto. And I said, there's no way I can end my Japan story here. And so I managed to find a job in the suburbs of Osaka and then stayed there for about 2 years. And I said, okay, 5 years is good enough. It's time for me to go to grad school. And it's like, I don't really need to go back to North America. I can always go back. That's home. There's really no reason for me to go back right now. And then I thought, okay, so where else can I go? I want to go to an English speaking country. So the next 2 were Australia and New Zealand, but their academic years began in April. So that didn't really match the timing that I had to link up to. That left Ireland and the UK. I wanted to be in a big city. That's London. So, it all got narrowed down very quickly. And so that's how I ended up in London, did a year and a half there, and then came back to the States.
So how do you feel? So you kind of wanted to leave Roxbury. You ended up in Japan for 5 years, then London, back to the US. What are some of the things culturally that you gained when you were abroad that you feel like are incorporated into your life now?
A lot of it is tied to language, I feel, because there are concepts and there are emotions that I automatically think of in Japanese that I don't necessarily think of in English. And it's interesting because I posted one of the photos I sent you from Japan. I posted on Instagram, and my friend replied. So it's the one with the young woman with her elbow pointing at the camera.
Oh, I wondered what the elbow was about.
We were in our 20s. We were young. We were just, being silly and foolish. So it has no cultural significance at all. It's sort of having fun. So I posted that and I tagged her, and then she wrote back, Natsukashi. And I'm like, yeah, it is. And, Natsukashi literally translates into nostalgic. Now, in English, we wouldn't say, oh, that's nostalgic. We'd say, oh, that takes me back, or that reminds me. But in Japanese, to me, that just sort of really brought me back, this feeling of like, oh yeah, that feels right for her to say that to me, and for me to have that feeling towards this picture and towards that conversation. And when I've gone back to Japan, because I've gone back a couple of times, after being away for about 10 or so years, the language comes back very quickly, the feelings come back, the memories come back, and I just feel this rootedness to the country that people wouldn't normally expect. The way in which I think people see me and then expect me to sort of have a feeling towards Japan is sort of as a tourist, or as, whether they're Japanese or, Westerners, they expect me to feel as though I was a tourist or just a guest in the country. And I was a guest, but at the same time, I also felt this sense of connection, because people saw that I was trying to learn the language, trying to understand the culture, trying to fit in. I would never blend in, but trying to fit in and really try to incorporate what I was doing there as someone who was new to the country.
So I have put up, it's interesting when you look at that idea of self-identity and actually feeling a sort of self-identity with Japanese culture, but also kind of like Lynn, where she's all in everything she does. It sounds like you're the same. So when you came back to the States, went back to the neighborhood that you had grown up in, but you also had a lot of leadership positions with arts organizations within the city. Actually, I was going to ask you, did you ever overlap with Julie Burroughs on some of your?
Yes, actually I did. So when she was the art czar here in Boston, I was on the Boston Cultural Council. And so I sat on the council while she was there. And when the new mayor brought her in. So when the mayor brought her in, I was also added to one of the task forces. I think the mayor's arts task force, or art wing of the task force. And so that's, I think, how I initially met her.
Okay. And it's small world. I actually know her because she was from Chicago. She was a deputy commissioner, I think, in our cultural affairs department as well. Okay. So, well, I'm going to bring Lynn back on so that we can talk about, first of all, you guys, I need to tell you something, that between the three of us, because I speak Spanish, French, Portuguese, English. Oh, and we all speak body language too. So you can just add that to your repertoire. But I think between the three of us, what do we have, like 12 different languages that we speak? Like, can you do where's my hand? High five on the, on the languages. So, so thank you both for sharing your stories and your journeys, your cultural journeys. I'm just wondering, tomorrow's Thanksgiving, not sure what you're doing, but how do you find that now that you've had these global experiences, what are some of the things that you find maybe are different or influence in your day-to-day lives, or even in your holiday traditions?
I have to tell you, that's an amazing thing that happened. I live in a condo building. We have 12 units. And one of my neighbors said, let's do Thanksgiving a little bit differently. So each of us is making a dish, and we're all going to either congregate outside or somewhere safe and drop off our portions for each other, so that we can collect the collective goodies and have our own Thanksgiving, and yet honor community, but not feel in any kind of physical danger. And that is all about community building. And I love it. And the notion of community will override everything. In spite of all the tragedies of COVID, if we turn to each other and we help each other, we speak to each other in however creative ways we need to make it work, we can get this done and even bring joy with it. And that's been something that I've been able to really appreciate. And I also got a cat recently. That's really helped a lot in terms of having companionship and being able to love a kitty again. So I'm very grateful for that. And for all the support that I've gotten from my colleagues, from my interns, my relatives, my brother and my sister and extended family, that makes a huge difference.
Just to feel that sense of community even when you can't be together. Derek, what about you?
So I think through all my journeys, the feeling that I've carried over all these years is feeling like both an insider and an outsider at the same time, because I'm back in my home city. I'm back in my home neighborhood. Everything is very familiar to me. And, you know, if my accent ever slips out, people are like, oh, right, yeah, you are from Boston. But having all of these experiences and having all of these, meeting all these people and having all this cultural contact, I also feel a sense of not feeling bound to traditions. And this is the city, so I'm in Boston. This is a city that thrives and is driven upon tradition. And so when there are times where I'm sort of like, why are we doing this? We don't need to do this. Why are we still honoring this? Why are we doing all these things? People kind of look at me like, why wouldn't we do this? Like, there's a sense of like, how dare you question? And so just having that feeling of being an outsider, an insider and outside, insider who understands, but who also comes with an outside perspective, impacts how I work, impacts how I talk to people, how I try to interact with people, the ideas I bring to a table, and even literally to a table. So, you know, I don't necessarily feel as though with Thanksgiving, so this Thanksgiving, having it with my chosen family. So my family is sort of split up. And so a friend and her young son are coming over. And so we're going to have Thanksgiving together. And so we'll have turkey, but then we'll add other things that may relate to our cultures or just be things that we like. So we'll have one thing at the core that is traditional, but then add other things. And for us, you know, that sense of choice, that sense of evolution is part of our Thanksgiving story and part of our stories as a whole.
And there's so much there. I have two questions that are completely different that I want to ask. So I'm going to say them both and we can figure out which one to go with first. But one, you know, when you talk about being an outsider and also just knowing, having lived in Boston, I know Lynn lived there as well. It's just so segregated and people have so many expectations of people. And I just wonder that, you know, as being African-American, when you talk about being an outsider expectations, do you feel, and I guess I should ask Lynn the same, you know, as being white or being Jewish, but how do you feel people project onto you as opposed to how you feel your identity is? And just one more thing on that, when you talked about colonial Boston is what Boston's known for. Like that's, you think of the Freedom Trail and Paul Revere and all that stuff. And that's the only thing you think of when you think of Boston. And then you show that picture of generations of, what was it, like 5 generations of people in Roxbury, in Boston. That is a story that I don't think people know as much. So
it's a story people don't know as much, and it's also, unfortunately, a story people don't even make an effort to find out about. And you know, part of it is just the narratives that have been established over the years that people feel comfortable in. It's just very comfortable for people to go with these narratives and not challenge them, again, because that's just part of the tradition. Oh, it's always been like this. But no one ever thinks about, well, how did it get this way? Like, what were the forces at play? What were the things that people did? You know, just what are the patterns that people still continue to hold on to today? So I remember when I came back to Boston, I came back in 2003. So I'd been in Japan, I traveled around Asia, lived in London, went to school there, traveled around Europe. You know, I had all these experiences, you know, I was ready to apply them somehow. You know, I decided to come back to Roxbury in part because it was more affordable than other parts of the city. But as I started growing myself professionally, when people said, "Oh, where are you from?" and I'd say, "Oh, I'm from Roxbury," they'd say, "Oh, Roxbury. Oh, are you okay? Do you hear gunshots? Is it a lot of crime around your neighborhood?" And I'm like, "No, not at all. It's actually pretty safe. I live in a nice apartment. It's, you know, very convenient to get to work. I don't have to commute an hour the way you do. I can get here in 20 minutes." And people it was just such a dissonance for people. They just didn't understand. And then not only do they have low expectations of my community, they had low expectations of me. Oh, have you been anywhere? Are you educated? Did you go to a good school? Like all of these things that I had to help people unlearn, you know, one way or another. But also then I had to build my own community because again, having that sense of being inside and outside, I knew that there were people who had experiences like mine. And I wanted to build that community both in Roxbury, like literally people I could go to up the street, but also just collectively around the city. And that's something that I've been doing over time as well. So yeah, those are the things that I felt, you know, just being a Black American coming back to the States after having all these experiences and trying to apply them to my life here.
Yeah, it's really fascinating when we look at, and that's why I wanted to talk about today, this whole idea of identity and culture and how our cultural influences, both things that we're born with, but then also like you said, the things that we learn along the way. I know as a Jewish girl growing up in the Midwest, we did not have like collard greens and black beans and rice and stuff at home for our meals. But now having a Brazilian husband, we do that's like just a regular staple. So realizing how that's going to be a really different experience for my son.
And it sounds like a delicious background too.
Oh, it's so good. Brazilian food it's just really good. And it's fun how even just sometimes ingredients or things that you might use are different. So you might flavor something differently than you might. I even think like bananas. My mother-in-law used to always make fried bananas for me. Never would have even thought of making those, and they're delicious. I mean, they're delicious. How can they not be? It's butter, sugar, bananas, fried. Yeah.
Well, food is such a unifying factor. And we also grew up eating Middle Eastern food and making kobiba and all kinds of dishes that were either from Syria or from Egypt or together. And those, like the stuffed grape leaves. We had a vineyard, a little vine in our backyard in Montreal. And guess what? I have one in Chicago too. And so I learned with my mother how to make the stuffed grape leaves. And that's one of my signature items. When I participate in fundraising exercises or programs, I donate cooking workshops to people, and they are all over it because they're so curious, like, how do you make them? And so I love being able to spread those kinds of traditions and teach them to other people. And what's interesting when you talk about inside or outside, by being an outsider, I'm a better recruiter. Because when I'm talking to candidates and clients, because I'm not embedded within the company, I can be more objective when I look at talent and their backgrounds and see if they would be a good fit for our clients' needs. So actually, it becomes an important characteristic. I'm not just looking at a resume. I'm looking at a human being and finding out what makes them unique and different and what assets they'll bring to a potential employer. So that to me has always been a positive factor. And the feeling of tribe is very important. So we have a sense of belonging. So I get that. Like when I travel, I always go visit Jewish communities in countries all over the world. So I feel that sense of kinship. But by the same token, it's my eyes are wide open to the greater universe and seeing how similar we are, how different we are, and how we can learn from each other. And that enriches my life. Like, for example, I have interns working for my firm. They come from every country in the world. And that is one of the things that I adore.
You know, that's interesting because when I travel, I know I'm not going to find soul food or, you know, Black American cuisine in most of the world, but I know I found Japanese food. And so I will often go and try to find that Japanese restaurant so that I can go and eat there and, you know, feel some level of comfort no matter where I'm in the world. Because I can either read the menu or talk to the people in Japanese, but also just enjoy that food and just feel that sense of comfort no matter where I am in the world.
And that, I think what you just said, Derek, encapsulates what we're talking about. So when you go for comfort food, it's sushi, you know, or Japanese food. Right. That's really fascinating. So it's Thanksgiving. We're being told, actually, my son showed me a picture from the news yesterday. We got in a fight because I thought it was a lie, because it was a picture of Fox News and it literally said, the CDC recommends no loud music, no loud singing, and no drinking. And I'm like, we're already staying at home. This is a meme. This is a joke. And it turns out it's actually not a joke, the CDC. Because if your music's too loud, you'll have to shout. If you shout or sing loud, you might spit on people. And if you drink, you'll kind of lose your inhibitions or your decision stuff. I am grateful that I love to sing loud, so I will probably be defying CDC rules tomorrow, singing and drinking. So, but let's talk about it. It's different. And Derek and I originally connected because our friends on the Backpack Show were looking for someone who really focused on gratitude or had a practice of gratitude in their life. So let's just finish up by talking a little bit about gratitude and what you're grateful right now, or how that permeates your life and your daily practice.
I'm grateful for the people, families, traditions that have contributed to my upbringing. And what I then do is put a creative spin on things, that I reinterpret things so that the custom becomes my custom. And that way, like for the Passover table, for example, the foods that I make, the new traditions that I've incorporated become my traditions, which then I share with my friends and family. So for me, gratitude isn't a singular expression. It's really broader. And that way, depending on what the circumstances are, yes, of course, I'm grateful that I can be self-sufficient and have my family who I love and be able to run my business in spite of COVID. And every year it's going to be slightly different. And I have a renewed sense of appreciation for what humanity can do to help each other. And so I'm very appreciative of being able to count myself in and to contribute back.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say something very similar. I am very, very grateful for the people in my lives, both my family and my chosen family. So my friends and my extended groups of friends. And I think what binds at least the extended family and the chosen family together is stories and storytelling. And that's what I am most grateful for. And that's how we express gratitude with each other. So my friend group travels extensively around the world. Oh, we did pre-COVID. We traveled all the time. We were travelers. Sometimes together, but often just on our own. And we would come back, and there was never an expectation of gift. There was never an expectation of bringing back anything other than amazing stories. And that's something that I truly, truly value in the friend group that I have, because no matter where we go, whether it's just to the next state or somewhere on the other side of the world, we bring back these amazing stories and encourage each other to continue to travel, to continue to grow, and to continue just to be the people we're meant to become. And that's how we express gratitude toward each other and just towards life in general.
Can I add one thing, Deanna?
Of course.
I am very grateful because I am wearing a jacket that my mother made for herself. She was a fashion designer, and it fits me perfectly. So now when I wear this jacket, I'm very grateful for her creativity, her love, and the fact that I can wear her old clothes. So when I wear it, I feel her presence all around me.
Mm-hmm. Do you know what I love about this? I'm actually getting like little goosebumps, and I'm going to ask you in a second what your spark is. But when we talk about that thing inside of you that drives you, do you realize in these stories that you have just told, the power of just a single minute? You know, so much of life you just kind of flip by and you waste time, and you know that joke of like, oh, that was an hour I'll never get back, and just the way that you're talking about combining customs into food. I know last night, my son and I, we made my great grandmother's poppy seed cookies that we're using. We always do nameplates, even though that's the three of us. We always do creative things to put where people will sit. So it's just me, my son, and my husband. We're doing nameplates with my great grandma's cookies. And of course, making those just makes me feel that lineage. Lynn, you're talking about even adding different ingredients. And how that makes just the simplest of things so meaningful. And Derek, how fabulous that promise of a story, and that your friend group that you get excited for each other, not jealous because they're traveling your home, because you've got that promise of this story and to be able to share their experience. It's really exciting for people who are listening. If anyone have people to add or to ask questions about that, but I just want to say that it just emphasizes that we have the power to make our lives meaningful. There's so much out of our control right now, but the fact that with these simple things and daily practices that we can add meaning to our lives and bring joy to others, like that's a superpower right there. Wow. All right. So speaking of superpower, here's one more. I've said this a couple times. Intercultural spark. It's that spark inside each of us that drives you to spark change in your business and in the world. So Derek, what do you think your spark is?
I would think my spark is opportunity, and it can be at any level, any shape, any form, because you just never know how your life is going to change when you meet one person, when you go to through that different door, when you take the train line one extra station and decide to walk back. You just never know who you're going to meet, what's going to happen, and what change is going to bring. And that to me, there's a sense of opportunity and excitement for every minute, as long as I'm active in that moment and take advantage of it. I'm not stuck to my phone, but I'm actually looking up, I'm looking around, I'm talking to people, I'm interacting with them, even a smile, a head nod, just something. There's an opportunity in every moment and every opportunity. That to me is what sparks, and what keeps me sparked, what keeps me going.
Wow. I can feel that being fully present in life.
Yeah.
Lynn, what about you?
Well, I love the fact that, Daryl, you were talking also about storyteller, because I'm also a storyteller. What people consistently have said to me with regards to work is, Lynn, you have such high energy. And that energy propels me. And when COVID started and we had to work from home, I said, I'm not going to lick this. And we've been doing really well and been successful, keep reinventing the business. So for every challenge, there's an opportunity, and an opportunity to reinvent myself, my business, and to be relevant to the world and to contribute back in whatever form it takes. So whether it's cooking or storytelling or recruiting or giving back by having interns work with me, being part of a bigger family, that drives me. And I love it. And it's something that nurtures me, and it keeps me happy. And it's something that's part of my DNA.
Thank you both so much for taking the time to chat. I know I'm just like excited. I'm excited to go do and to be, you know, just all that opportunity to add meaning and build your life. So I really appreciate it. I'm going to end our broadcast. Don't leave though. I'm going to stay with you for a second, but thank you both so much for being on Intercultural Spark today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.